There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fourth in our ongoing Zoom series. I'm Kate Wheeler, President and CEO of Crystal Cove Conservancy, and I'm so excited that so many of you have logged in to join us. Hi, Brett. I see you just joined. Great to see you. Of course, it would be better if we were together at the Cove and we could catch up in person, but until then, which hopefully will be soon, we're really grateful that all of you are here with us. Before we get started, and some of you have heard me say this before, put your chat as we go along and we'll try to answer as many as we can. You also might want to put your view, set your view to speaker view, and to do that on the top right of your Zoom window, you'll see view and just click select speaker view rather than gallery view, and you'll probably have a better experience. So I'm so glad to have with us Dr. Brett Sanders, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Urban Planning and Public Policy at UCI, where he leads the UCI Flood Lab. And as a just added bonus, Assemblymember Cottie Petrie-Norris, representing California's 74th Assembly District, will also be joining us a little later to update us on some legislation she's working on that relates to our conversation today. So before I hand it over to Dr. Sanders, I want to provide all of you with just a bit of context for those of you who may be new to the Conservancy. Crystal Cove State Park is located on the traditional lands and waters of the Ohashiman and Tongva tribal nations. Many of you know Crystal Cove because you hike the backcountry, you walk the beaches early in the morning, you paint here when the light is just right, or you bring your best friends, your college roommates, and all of your out-of-town guests here when you visit. You know Crystal Cove and a lot of the Cove secrets. What you should also know is how disparate pieces of this one place come together to ensure that the whole of Crystal Cove, the backcountry habitats, the tide pools, the beaches, the offshore marine protected area, are forever protected. Because we hold the concession contract in the park, we're both the nonprofit partner and the concessionaire here in the park. Revenue from both cottage rentals and the food service stays right here at Crystal Cove, supporting our work to restore, educate, and protect. Like a lot of relationships in the park, this relationship between the cottages and the concessions and our work in education and conservation is a symbiotic one. The cottages and food service provide revenue and facilities to support our STEM education programs, while also supporting ongoing work to maintain the historic structures. In turn, our education programs, while developing young scientists' minds and cultivating their connections to our planet, they provide rigorous and engaging science education that's grounded in ongoing conservation work and the habitat restoration and environmental research that we do here. Data these students collect in turn informs land managers' responses to critical conservation questions and helps us protect the habitat for our residents, the gnatcatchers, the osprey, the snowy plover. Today, our STEM education programs serve almost 10,000 students each year, almost 3/4 of those from our most under-resourced Title I schools. None of this happens, of course, without California state parks. We are because they are. And we really couldn't ask for a better partner. So thanks to all of our state park partners, our park superintendent, Eric Dimmel, the park aides, the interpretive staff, the natural resource managers, we count ourselves lucky to spend our day with all of them. So now let's talk beaches. And I will say, when one is trying to write an introduction for Dr. Sanders, one runs into a lot of phrases like environmental hydrodynamics, numerical modeling, and things like free surface flow and transport algorithms. So it's important for me to say before I go much further that I, like many of you, I'm no scientist or environmental engineer. I'm a generalist. So what I can put together from reading about Brett and his work is that he spends his days doing the work we aim to inspire young people to take up. He researches the way water flows and flooding occurs in coastal areas, including watersheds, estuaries, harbors, and bays. He creates mathematical models and works with social scientists and communities to create and analyze solutions to the issues facing coastal ecosystems. And he teaches and mentors university students aiming to one day work alongside engineers like Brett. When one talks to students who've studied with him or his colleagues, you hear phrases like brilliant engineer, innovative thinker, dedicated environmentalist. And I can say he is all of those. Brett is a member of our board's Education and Conservation Committee, and he's been a key contributor and advisor to our work in both education and conservation here. including the development of our new coastal dynamics education program, which we're really excited about. It introduces high school students to coastal engineering as they study how the beaches at Crystal Cove State Park are changing. So Brett, how did I do?
I'm flattered and really pleased to be here, Kate. So thank you so much for the really warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll have some questions at the end, but for now, I'm going to go off camera and leave all these wonderful people to you.
Thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. And great to be here with you. I'm going to share a screen from my desktop computer. I'm going to walk you through a new resource that I've put together here with my research team at UCI, along with some high school students that I'll be sort of introducing shortly. This is going to be a presentation from a new website that we have set up to create information about beach change in Orange County. And so this particular presentation I've set up as a blog post. So it's entitled Beach Loss Trends in Orange County. And at the bottom of this post, there's an opportunity for you to provide comments and ask questions. And if you want to do that, maybe after the talk or even during the talk, I'll take a look at those over the next coming days and try to give you a thoughtful response. So I want to begin with a few acknowledgements about this work. I'm with the UCI Flood Lab at UCI, which is a group I lead. Flooding and erosion is a growing problem around the world. And so we've been working in interdisciplinary teams over the last several years to try to think seriously about how we can bring the tools of engineering, advanced simulation tools, knowledge about climate change, big data, bring all that to bear on these growing problems of flooding and erosion. And especially thinking about how we communicate flood risk in ways that more people can understand and more people can then be empowered to take actions that would reduce those consequences in the future. I'm a faculty member in the School of Engineering, and I work also with the Blum Center for Poverty Alleviation. So I want to begin with just a few acknowledgements. And if the high school students, there's a few that have been working with me. If they want to turn on their video, we can acknowledge them shortly. I've got graduate students, Joe Schubert, Daniel Call, Arian Zhang. Actually, Joe's a postgraduate research specialist. Matt Brand, a graduate student who just got his PhD, and Napoleon Gudino Elizondo, who is now a research professor in Mexico, who came out of our group. But this is a group that has been part of this beaches team that's helped us put this work together. And this website in particular is an outgrowth of work that was done by high school students. And I wanted to showcase those students today because they are clearly high school education is a big part of the Crystal Cove Conservancy's efforts, and also to just give some credit to the great high schools around here that are doing wonders with our students. And I think one of them is here. Gwen, raise your hand. And then Jenna and Joel, I don't know if you made it online. Both Jenna and Joel are running a track meet right now. Jenna's at University High School, Gwen's at University High School, and Joel Akiyoshi is at Beckman High School. So they are trying to pack so many things into their day, but at least they were able to stop in shortly for just a moment. Thanks, Gwen. So this work is an outgrowth of a research project that was has been funded by the NOAA Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, Effects of Sea Level Rise program. We've also had great cooperation from Orange County Public Works, who's shared a lot of recent survey data with us to make this work possible. And also California State Parks is now working with us to support some drone monitoring work that's allowing us to kind of focus in on some hotspots of erosion along the coast. Crystal Cove Conservancy has been a fantastic partner, and I'm excited to be here today with you. And lastly, I want to point out that this kind of the story I'm telling here is a story that was previously published 30 years ago by a paper by Ron Flick, who is with California Department of Boating and Waterways and also affiliated with Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So if you want another more detailed description of some of the history of beaches in Southern California, I highly sort of recommend this paper, and you can kind of click on it here. There's a link to that paper. Okay, so without further ado, let's get rolling into the context for this presentation, which is some kind of scary news that we're going to need mountains of sand to save our beaches. There's been research done by the USGS, led by Sean Batusik, pointing to up to 2/3 of Southern California beaches being eroded by 2100 without human intervention. And this has enormous implications for Southern California. Here's our nearby Corona del Mar Beach. I mean, that's a good example of a beach in Orange County that attracts people from all over Southern California, people from Riverside, people from Orange County, people from Newport Beach, all enjoy that beach. And what would it mean if we didn't have sand? What would that mean for families across Southern California who use the beach as perhaps the most sort of common family activity I can think of in Southern California is a day at the beach with your family. What does it mean for a region where our cultural identity is tied up with the beach? Thinking back to the music of the 60s. Or what does it think now for these major brands that are all based in Orange County and they project Orange County around the world as a lifestyle, a beach lifestyle? So here we are, we're threatening to lose, or at risk as our beaches. Another issue about beaches is that they provide protection against big damaging waves. So beaches are nature's defense against coastal flooding. So this is something we all need to be concerned about. And the question I want to address with this particular presentation is this one. How have beaches across Orange County changed in the past century? What's driving these changes? And now what regions of the Orange County coast are facing severe beach loss and coastal damage at this time? So this presentation is backwards looking and kind of thinking about today. I'll close with some thoughts about the future but I think most of this presentation is sort of historically oriented, and I think this focus on, or this sort of talk right out of Crystal Cove is the perfect place to be giving this presentation. Not only because of the basically 100 years of history, of human history or more here at Crystal Cove, but also because of Crystal Cove has a stream influence. Crystal Cove has a tidal influence. There's a wave influence. There's a human influence of construction going on. And so Crystal Cove really epitomizes coastal change along the Southern California coastline. Okay, so you can follow along if you'd like, beaches.eng.uci.edu, and you can come back to this website anytime to find out more information. So we'll go back to the top. We'll go to the homepage. And the homepage brings us to kind of 4 different points of information. One based on sort of drawn from aerial imagery, one drawn from drone imagery, one drawn for satellite imagery, and one with a set of beach ratings. And this beach rating system is something that the high school students put together as a summer project, and we've continued to use since that time. But I'm going to start my presentation with the aerial imagery, which tells us really 100 years of history of how the coastline has changed. And we're going to start with kind of thinking about Northern Orange County and then a little bit about Southern Orange County, because there really is a strong contrast between the two. Okay, so let's start with Northern Orange County, circa 1851, 1889. What were we looking at this time? This is a map that was put together by a group, San Francisco Estuary Institute, and also at SQUIRT. And they took historical T-sheets mapped by the US Coast Survey, and they determined all the coastal wetland habitats that we had as of the latter part of the 1800s. And what you can see here is that the Northern Orange County coast had a number of sort of gaps or coastal lowlands that were wetland habitats. So we see all this green all along from Newport Bay into the Huntington Beach area, into the northern Huntington Beach area, the Bolsa Chica area, up in Seal Beach, Long Beach, up in the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, filled with these coastal marshes. Okay, and then along...
Hey, Brett, can I just jump in for 1 second? Somebody asked what the site is so they can follow along. Can you tell us that site again and we'll put it in the chat?
Yeah, maybe I can just type it right into the chat.
Oh, that'd be great.
Chat, it's gonna be the chat. beaches.eng.uci.edu.
Okay, perfect. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So we have these coastal wetland habitats, that were all along the Northern Orange County coast and into the sort of what's now Los Angeles County. But if you look right along the coastline, we see some purple colors, which is dune habitat. And then we see a little bit of beach. Okay, so you see a little bit of yellow corresponding to the beach. But most of what we had along Northern Orange County was dune habitat with a little bit of beach and that was all protecting our wetland habitat, okay? So we need these dunes and these beaches out at the edge of the ocean in order to protect our wetlands from the high energy of the waves that come in from the ocean. And I think it's important to appreciate the way that the beaches and the dunes protect the wetlands, because it's sometimes you'll come across the perception today that wetlands are protecting us from damaging storms from the ocean, when in reality it's the beaches and the dunes that are protecting the wetlands. If these sort of sensitive wetlands filled with organic soils and plants and bird nests and grounds for small fish, if those are all exposed to the energy of the coastal ocean, then those would be rapidly eroded. So we really rely on beaches and dune habitats to protect both natural resources like wetlands and also our developed human resources like housing and businesses and ports and things like that. So beaches are nature's defense against sort of coastal flooding. Okay, another important perspective about historical Northern Orange County is the dominant influence we've had of rivers that have brought sediment to the coast. So the Santa Ana River historically would come out of this notch in Corona, and it might flow up to Long Beach, it might flow into Newport Bay, it might flow out at Huntington Beach. And so it took many different pathways to the coast. And when it did that, it delivered large volumes of sediment to the coast. And so that brought the sand, and the sand, of course, then built up our coastal defense system. Similarly, up in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles River might have drained out to Santa Monica, or might have drained south into Long Beach as it does today. So that's kind of the historical context. We had these big rivers, the rivers delivered sediment to the coast, and then we had these coastal gaps with the beaches and dunes that protected the wetlands and the coastal land from flooding and erosion. Okay, now let's think about Southern Orange County, a little bit different. Southern California had much sort of these elevated marine terraces. We didn't have a whole lot of coastal wetland habitat in Southern California. We had some dune habitat, we had a little bit of wetland habitat in places, but look at this, we had a nice, large, wide beach habitat just south of Dana Point, where Doheny Beach is today. And sadly, this presentation today is going to come back to Doheny Beach, and we're going to see what a crisis it faces today now that its sand is no longer there. So Southern Orange County then, different setting, more elevated topography. We can see an old photo here from 1928 of Doheny Beach. The railroad had gone in at that time. Okay, and then if we look at San Juan Creek there, this is a photograph of San Juan Creek, also around 1930. It was, you can see we had a riparian sort of floodplain environment. There was a day use area, and the San Juan Creek would deliver sediment into this sort of sheltered area south of Dana Point, and that sand would then feed this beach which is now Doheny. And if we turned and looked up the coast at Dana Point, I mean, this is a striking photograph showing Dana Points, plural. At one time before the harbor was constructed, there were several Dana Points with different names. Forgive me, I don't remember the name of each of them. But you can see the way the waves came around that point. The waves struck these cliffs. That led to sediment being pulled down into the water here and pulled into this littoral zone. So historically, Doheny Beach was fed with sediment both by San Juan Creek and also by the wave action on the cliffs of Dana Point and further north. So, okay, so that was the historical context, and I want to thank the Doheny Beach Interpretive Association for making those photographs available online. So what happened? How did things evolve? Well, with economic growth in tourism, actually in the 1920s, leaders of Southern California recognized that the beaches were too small to support the tourist economy that they had envisioned developing. And you can see here advertisements that were placed in magazines back in the 1930s, trying to attract people from across the US to come out to Southern California on a vacation. And so another thing that developed was the conversion of marshes like Newport Bay into harbors. And we can see a photograph here of Newport Bay as it was in a process of converting from salt marsh habitat into a harbor and a marina. And in fact, it was the conversion of harbors and marinas through marshlands into ports and harbors during the 30s, 40s, and 50s that generated a large volume of sediment, which widened our beaches So essentially the wide beaches we had after the 1930s and 40s and 50s were a direct consequence of A, taking marsh sediments and putting them on the coast, and B, a desire to grow a tourist economy in Southern California. And we can see evidence of that sediment placement in this data here, which shows the volume of sediment placed along the coastline of Northern Orange County between the 1930s and the 2020s. So you can see, going back, say in Long Beach in the 1940s, over 1 million cubic yards, around 1 million cubic yards of sediments being placed in Long Beach. Seal Beach, around, again, several projects with millions of cubic yards of sediment being placed. More recently, there was a deliberate effort to really sustain beaches in Northern Orange County with this Surfside to Sunset project, which was supported by the Army Corps of Engineering. You can see those volumes are actually over 1 million cubic yards of sediment. And more recently, we've had some work in Bolsa Chica, which led to sediment placement of smaller volumes. And there was a history of nourishment at Huntington Beach over the years, large volumes of sediment being placed along the coastline. Newport Bay, as an example, 1930s, look how much sediment was excavated, close to 10 million cubic yards of sediment were taken out of Newport Bay, placed along the coast, widening beaches, and in the process, destroying the ecosystems, the marshes and so forth. So basically, in the Northern Orange County, there's a history of converting marshlands into marinas and harbors for defense, for recreation, and then widening beaches. And then if we looked at the Santa Ana River flows, that's another really strong supplier of sediment to the region. And you can see a pattern of sort of delivery of sediment to the coast. One thing to remember when you look at time series of flows in rivers, these are peak floods in rivers for each year. The sediment flows with really 99% of it comes with the biggest floods. So you could explain most of the sediment delivered to the coast with just a few of these big floods that brought water towards the coast. Okay, so now if we look at the Southern Orange County, we see a kind of a different history here where there was one large harbor construction. Dana Point Harbor was constructed starting in the 60s, and you can see the sediment that was supplied to the coast at that time with the construction of that harbor and the destruction of one of the Dana Points. And then there was also construction of the San Onofre nuclear power station, which led to sort of land from the top of the bluff was excavated and put down on the coastline. So there's a fair amount of sediment placement at San Onofre in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But in contrast, there just hasn't been the same sustained level of sediment placement along the coast in the southern part of Orange County that we've seen in the northern part of Orange County. And then if you looked at the history of stream flows down San Juan Creek as a sort of an indicator of sediment delivery to the coast, the last significant storm was sort of between, it was a 2006, 2005, in that time frame. And you can see that over the last 10 or 12 years, as we've gone through years of drought, we're not seeing the sediment delivered to the coast along San Juan Creek. So Southern Orange County, in contrast with Northern Orange County, has just seen less sediment delivery, much less sediment delivery to the coast over recent decades. Okay, so with this in mind, the high school students, Jenna Kim and Gwen Sanders from University High School, they came into UCI and they went on Google Earth and they started measuring the width of beaches with satellite imagery. And the Google Earth data went back around 25 years or so. And so they collected beach width data for a number of beaches, and they came up with a rating system where red meant that beach was in danger, green meant the beach was doing okay, yellow meant, well, you should be cautious. Okay, so we ended up with several red beaches. One was Sunset Beach up in the Northern Orange County, and both Doheny Beach and Capistrano Beach showed up as red in Southern Orange County. And what's neat about this tool, and I think they learned this in high school, this is so cool, you can click on this button here, and then you get this little interactive viewer where you can zoom in and click on a beach, and we can go into Crystal Cove just as an example. Okay, so we'll come in here, click on Crystal Cove, and you get a little trend line there. So you see data of how wide the beach was for different dates between 1990 and 2020. You can see that the data is pretty noisy, and it's really hard to get like a strong, correlation in that data. So in this case, it came up a green because it looked like there was more increase than decrease, but you could probably debate whether that's the case. It's been a stable beach compared to most beaches in Southern California. But then if we went down south and looked at a place like Doheny Beach, look what we see here. 20 years of data, back in 95, the beach was around 100 meters wide. And as of 2017, 2018, it was down to like 30 or 40 meters wide. Okay, so we're seeing these really concerning trends at South Doheny and also at Capo Beach. It's another one that's seen this decline in beach width. Okay, so that was the work of Jenna and Gwen. And then if we look at some photographs of what's happening at Doheny Beach, we can see that the day use area has lost one of its parking lots. They can't use it anymore. It's been roped off there. If you zoom in this photograph, we can see the county's beach park, which is just south of Doheny. This is a county property. They had a basketball court and a little boardwalk that got washed into the ocean, and that's been lost as well. So this region, the coastline, is under severe stress right now. Another photograph here of some infrastructure that's being damaged and we're losing. So this is a big concern. I want to point out one more thing about this particular image, and this is taken from one of our drones that we fly to do routine monitoring for state parks. We have the parking lot being impacted now, but just steps away is the railroad that connects Los Angeles to San Diego, and steps away from that is the highway, the Pacific Coast Highway. So clearly we have some critical infrastructure which is at risk here as we lost sort of losing this beach and seeing it shrink. Okay, so that was work that brought together around 25 years of data. And then we had a question, well, what about if we go back further in time? How would it look? And so then Joel Akiyoshi from Beckman High School came into UCI and helped me out last summer. Actually did it all remotely. But he went ahead and started trying to get older aerial imagery that was available from the County of Orange. So the County of Orange has been doing aerial photography for a long time to support all sorts of different planning and development needs. And you can look at like an old image that they had available back from 1927 showing Newport Beach and the way the harbor was. And at this time, you could see that the Santa Ana River Channel there'd been some constructed there, but the old Santa Ana River used to drain into Newport Bay like that. So historically, Santa Ana River would come into Newport Bay. But you can see some contrast between 1927 and 2001. And so Joel went ahead and took imagery that was available. Every couple of years there was an image, maybe sometimes 3 or 4 years would go by. He went up and set up a bunch of transects all along the beach and ended up trying to measure beach width at every little transect. And these transects correspond to wave data that's being produced by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography has a coastal wave prediction system. And so we try to get beach data for every point in the system where they predict the waves, with the idea that we can start analyzing beach changes and wave data at the same time. But what Joel found is when he looked at trends in beach width over time, over 100 years, he used the same sort of color coding that Jenna and Gwen used, and he said that these beaches on West Newport actually showed some increase in beach width overall, and the beaches that were south facing at Newport generally showed loss of beach width. Okay, and so he plotted the trends here, and when we look at these transects all correspond to south facing beaches in here. Okay, so each, for example, 22 to 40, we can go down here and find the plot for 22 to 40, and you can kind of see on average how the beach has been changing in that part of Newport Beach. Whereas if you click to spot, say, one of these like 61 to 70, we can go in here and grab the 61 to 70, and it kind of looks like things were increasing in West Newport. And that might surprise people who've been around Newport a long time, because that West Newport has actually had some serious problems. And in fact, if you look at the history, there was a time when the beach width was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it recovered. So what happened? Maybe somebody could punch that into the chat box. I'm sure someone with local knowledge knows exactly what happened. What happened is that a project came in and this groin system was constructed, where these sort of riprap jetties were constructed perpendicular to the shoreline with the goal of trying to trap sediment as it moves south. So waves tend to move sediment from the north to the south, from Huntington Beach to Newport Beach. So the idea of these groins was that they would sort of capture the sediment and hold it there along the coastline. And in fact, if you were to go back and look at these plots now, before and after that groin was constructed, you can see strong evidence that the groins did in fact have a sort of a positive effect on beach width. Now you can debate, other adverse impacts of groins, adverse impacts in terms of ecosystems, in terms of surfing and things like that. But in terms of beach width, there's pretty strong evidence that they were a success. If you look at the south-facing beaches, it kind of looks like before and after the berms. So if we look at, say, a south-facing beach, say one of 22 to 40 down in here, what happened there? Well, we can jump down to that plot, and you can see that, well, it seems like there might have been a little bit of a drop down, but overall, it doesn't seem like the south-facing beaches show too much, change after that project went in. Okay, there's also trend analysis from Huntington Beach here, and a little bit from Doheny Beach as well. But I'm going to jump ahead because I have something else I want to share with you first, and we'll come back to Doheny Beach. So if you're navigating the website, we're going to go back to the landing page, and now we're going to go down and we're going to take a look at the satellite tab. So satellites give us the ability to measure beach width much more frequently. So a satellite goes over every spot of the earth, repetitively. Some of the satellites that we're working with are visiting, this part of the coast a couple times a month and capturing a sharp image. So we're kind of looking at this satellite to kind of help us measure how beaches change from basically on a seasonal basis and on an interannual basis. And that's important because beaches go through a big transition between summer and winter. During the summer, beaches tend to get wider as sand gets pushed onshore by the waves. So lighter waves tend to come in summer. The lighter waves tend to push sediment onshore, and you build up a wide beach. And then when big waves come in the winter, those big waves tend to erode the sediment, pull it offshore, and that forms a sandbar further offshore. Okay, so imagine a beach here like Crystal Cove, and you can see the bluff is up here and the beach is here, and then in the wintertime you might expect the sand to come offshore and might be a sandbar. Okay, this is really what I call nature's defense against coastal flooding, and the reason why is because when there's sand along the shoreline and you pull that sand offshore and form a sandbar, the waves will break further offshore and you'll dissipate the energy of the waves way out here, so that by the time the wave runs up and hits the bluff, it's lost most of its energy. So nature's way of dealing with energetic waves is to say, okay, I'm going to put sand offshore, I'm going to create a little mountain. So the wave has to go over the mountain, it's going to break, it's going to lose its energy, and then it won't damage my coast. The concern we have now is that as we lose our sand supply, we take away the sand, then we don't have the ability to form a sandbar. And now the waves aren't going to be dissipated offshore. The waves are going to be dissipated right on the bluff. Okay, so this is one of the feedbacks that we're really concerned about in terms of increasing erosion with sea level rise and with the loss of sand supply to the coast. Okay, so to get this, to measure this seasonal cycle, we use a couple different satellites, one that's developed by NASA, which is called the Landsat satellite, and another one that's a European Space Agency project called Sentinel-2. Okay, and those satellites will go over a site multiple times a month, and with that, we can process the imagery, look for the interface between the water and the sand, and that gives us the shoreline, and then we get another interface, which is the edge of the beach next to the development, and that gives us the other side of the beach. And then we can get a beach width measurement over time. Okay, so just to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to show you an example of how we monitored Newport Beach before and after a nourishment project. This is a hose going out into the groin field at West Newport, and this was pumping sediment in 2017. Okay, and that groin field is right over here in West Newport. So I'm going to show you results of satellite measurements of beach width at 4 different transects. Two transects on South Newport Beach, they're numbered 413 and 423. One transect, which is right in the middle of the groin field, and that's 443. and then one transect, which is right next to the Santa Ana River. Okay, so if we come down here, we're going to number these. We're going to start with this southern transect, and the last one in the drawing is going to be Santa Ana River. So Santa Ana River is down here, and South Newport is here, and the nourishment project happened in 2017. So what you can see, first of all, in the data is we've got 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. So we can see there's a lot more data points every year than we get with just aerial imagery that was collected from the past. On top of that, we can see that where the nourishment project was done, there's a step change in the width of the beach. So beach is getting smaller over time, nourishment project comes in, it increases, but then it starts decreasing again. Okay, so it's not a permanent solution. It's adding sediment to the cell, and then that sediment moves and feeds other beaches. Now, if you look at this transect by the Santa Ana River, you can see a really strong seasonal cycle, how the beach gets narrower and then gets wider again and narrower and wider again. So you can see that seasonal cycle of beach width in the data. So that's the neat thing about the satellites. You can see more fine resolution information in terms of the temporal response. Okay, so that's the satellite story. And then lastly, I want to wrap up my presentation with the drone imagery that we're collecting down down at Doheny. Okay, so now we're down in Doheny. We talked about the importance of having sand in your system to mitigate the waves, to reduce the wave energy hitting the coast. And so here we are in Doheny, and what do we have? The sand is gone. We've got some cobble, some gravel, some bedrock offshore. So you don't have the same volumes of sand. It's more of a coarser material. If you look closely at what's at stake here, we've got the railroad, we've got Coast Highway. We've already sort of started putting in some riprap as a temporary measure to try to guard some of that infrastructure, but that's not a long-term solution. Okay, so in support of State Parks' efforts to manage this coastline, we've been flying some UAVs every month or so at that site. And so let me show you a picture. This is a UAV which takes off vertically and then flies like an airplane. It's kind of a cool little guy. It's called a Quantix Drone. This is Joe Schubert, who's a research specialist in my group who leads all of this drone monitoring work. Okay, so off it goes. And then wouldn't you love to be a drone and to sort of take in these views all the time? It's just a fabulous sight to have once you're up there. But what we do is we look downwards with the drone. We take images looking straight down. And with those images, we can construct what we call digital elevation models of the land surface. So we can construct a three-dimensional model of how high the ground is at different dates. And you can see where there's cars parked in parking lots. You can see the shape of the riprap. You can see these bed forms along the coast where the sediment is actually shaped in like bowls, and those actually move around over time. Okay, so the idea is you can take a survey at one date, survey another date, and start monitoring how things are changing over time with this drone imagery and quantify some of the impacts. So this image here is kind of a little graphical representation of before and after a wave event in 2019. You can see that after the big South Swell event came in, there was a erosion of this sort of part of the parking lot. We started seeing concrete that's breaking and falling off, and clearly this is an area of significant concern. So I want to show you some results from more recently, from April 2020, and just to also to emphasize how we're linked to the wave climate. So this diagram here is called a wave rose, and it shows you the direction the wave is coming in. In this case, this is a wave period rose, so how long the wave is, and this is a wave height rose over here, basically how big is the wave. So this diagram tells us we're getting a lot of wave energy during this period, July 1st through July 10th, 2020. So it was a summer period. We had these big swells coming in from the south. And the swells were bringing waves with energy with a wave period around 20 to 22 seconds. That's a really long south swell. And when we look at the wave height for that south swell, we're looking at a wave height of 6 to 9 feet. Okay, so you get a 6 to 9 foot swell with a period of 20 seconds. That is a recipe for a wave that runs way up the beach and can cause quite a bit of erosion. So what did we see? Well, this is an example of what happened as a consequence of that southerly wave event. We saw considerable damage to infrastructure, and you can see that all these regions here seem to show quite a bit of erosion. Okay, but we can quantitatively look at that with our data, and what I'm going to show you is a change in elevation between July 10th and July 1st, right along a set of transects. So I have transect 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to show you a change in the ground elevation during that time. So the red colors here show areas where the ground actually got higher, and the blue colors are areas where the ground went lower. So all this is the beach, okay? But what the waves did is they really carved out the top of the beach and they flattened it out, and they moved material down the beach and placed it sort of closer to the water's edge. We also see areas where the shoreline really did move back, or the parking lot got eroded back by this sort of blue stripe right up in here. So I'm going to draw your attention to transect 4 right here, where we saw the dark blues. And I can show you some profile plots of, if we go to transect 4, which is down here, we can see the July 10th, 2020 is this profile. So over here on the left-hand side is like the parking lot, and out here is the water. So right-hand side is water, left-hand side is parking lot. So here's the ground elevation, and now the ground elevation comes down and drops right at the edge of the parking lot around 1 meter, further to land than it was 10 days earlier. So that means we saw like a 1 meter erosion of the coastline in just in 1 week. So that's a concerning trend. We also see that the face of the beach goes up and down quite a bit. So elevations on the beach can be going down, up and down all the time. And so we see some natural variability there. Okay, so I want to come back and wrap up now with a few just summary comments, and that's posted here on my on this sort of blog post. Okay, so we had this question, how have beaches across Orange County changed over the past century? What's driving these changes? What regions of the coast are facing severe loss and damage at this time? And we saw that humans are doing a lot to drive change. We made our beaches considerably wider when we constructed marinas and ports, and we did nourishment projects at the expense of natural systems, at the expense of marshes and the ecosystems that they support. And then as we've developed the watershed and we've changed the way sediment flows to the coast, we've kind of limited the supply of sediment into the coastal zone. That sediment's going to be really important for managing future coastal erosion. So if we take a look at the difference between, Doheny Beach as of, say, the 1920s and 30s, what you saw is an area where waves could come, they could strike these cliffs, they could move sediment in this direction and feed this beach. We also had a river that came out and could supply sediment into this area. Now what we have is, because of the way the harbor is constructed, we can't have any delivery of sediment from up coast at this point. And as we have built out the watershed and we've really restricted the amount of sediment that can flow to the coast, we've also lost the supply that often comes from San Juan Creek, especially over the last couple of decades where we've had drought. On top of that, the wave climate in this region is different. So we don't have the same sort of forces moving sediment down coast because of the way the breakwaters change the wave direction. Okay, so that's just an example of how this area and why this area is being stressed at this time. And another reason to be concerned is because we're tracking along. This is the sea level rise projection, basically a data on historical sea levels from 1800 to around 2000 to 2010. These are all measurements in black and gray. And then these colored lines are projections of what the sea level could be in the future, depending on what our emission scenarios are and how much energy we consume and what our carbon footprint is. So it really behooves us to do everything we can to avoid these super high trajectories, because that's going to just have a devastating impact on the coast. And we want to do everything we can to stay on these lower trajectories. I'll also point out that that this diagram here shows how waves are likely to change in the future. All the red colors here of the globe are areas where climate models are saying that wave energy is going to be greater in the future in a warming climate. So we're going to see more wave energy in the Southern Ocean, and even maybe a little bit less, less wave action in the North, I'm sorry, over here in the North Pacific. So remember I pointed out that Doheny Beach was being hit by those southerly swells. Where do those southerly swells come from? Those southerly swells come from big old massive storms in the Southern Ocean that generate big waves that move all the way across the globe and then strike us here in Orange County. So if we have more energy in the future in the Southern Ocean, then we have a lot of beaches that are going to be exposed. Okay, what can we do about it? We've been researching at UCI with funding from NOAA, ways in which we can manage sediment in smarter ways and be more responsive, be more innovative, to try to put sediment where it needs to be to support coastal resilience. And we wrote a paper about some of the barriers and opportunities to beneficially reuse sediment that has to be cleaned out of river channels, sediment that has to be cleaned out of bays. A lot of that sediment can be repurposed and put in places where potentially it can help from a coastal resilience perspective. But it's tricky to do that. You want to match the ecosystem needs. You want to sort of match the physical needs for the sand. Not all sands are the same. You have to match the sand so it works within that system. And right now it's just really tough for coastal managers to get projects moving forward and to even innovate because of the regulatory environment especially. It's a really tough environment to navigate with a lot of different agencies, federal, state, local, that have a say in these projects. And so another big need is for thinking seriously about how we can support more innovation and more creativity in how we respond to sea level rise. So on that note, I want to thank you for your interest and your attention, and it's been a pleasure sharing with you today.
Brett, thank you. That was amazing and fascinating, and we had a really active chat going. So before we jump to the Q&A, I want to properly introduce Cottie Petrie-Norris, who has joined us on video now. And maybe while I do that, Brett, you could look at some of the questions in the chat too. Assemblymember Cottie Petrie-Norris is going to speak to us about what you were just talking about, Brett, that ever-present question, what can we do? Cottie was first elected to represent the 74th Assembly District, which includes Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, Laguna Woods, Newport Beach, portions of Irvine and Huntington Beach, and Crystal Cove State Park. She was first elected in 2018 and then re-elected in 2020. In her first term, Cottie secured millions of dollars in funding for projects in our district, including funding for our North Beach Cottage Restoration Project. Cottie, thank you. And introduced important legislation to address sea level rise, improve services for veterans, and help small businesses. She lives in Laguna Beach with her family and has a rescue dog I hear named Flounder, who, based on his name, I'd really like to meet. So Cottie, thank you so much for joining us. So good to see you, even if it is only on Zoom.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here, Kate. As you know, Crystal Cove is literally one of my favorite places on the entire planet. And I always love hearing, Brett, about your work and everything that you're doing. It's absolutely fascinating.
It really is. Cottie, before we jump to questions, I'd love for you to share what you're working on now, or a portion of what you're working on now, particularly AB 67 and 72. And I know your legislative priorities are really expansive and quite diverse, but for today, tell us a little bit more about these bills and what you're hoping to accomplish with them.
Well, Kate, as we all know, the California coast is one of the great treasures of the world. It's 840 miles of breathtaking beauty. It's home to almost 70% of Californians. It's a huge and critical driver of the California economy. And as we heard from Brett, all of this really is under threat from the looming threat of sea level rise. And we're talking about millions of people and billions of dollars at risk as part of California's coastal economy. And so because of that, addressing the threat of sea level rise and working to protect the coast has always been one of my top priorities. And this session, we've introduced a couple pieces of legislation in that arena. As you mentioned, AB 67 is the Sea Level Rise Preparedness Act of 2021. And this is going to make sure that our state agencies are taking sea level rise into account when we are planning or investing in coastal infrastructure. And then I've introduced a couple of bills, and I know, Brett, we were just exchanging some emails about these yesterday, that are trying to get at the heart of, I think, some of the challenges that, Brett, you mentioned we face when we're talking about doing coastal restoration and adaptation projects. The reality is there is a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of regulatory hoops that folks have to jump through to do this good work. And I know we're all familiar with the phrase cutting red tape. And one of the things I'm really pushing for is for us to cut green tape and make it easier for us to get these good projects up and running and online. So I've introduced a couple pieces of legislation to do that, including AB 72, which will start to establish a coordinated and efficient process for for the permitting of coastal projects.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Will you tell us a little bit more about AB 72? My understanding is that it revises current law to be more, as you said, more efficient and more effective. What are the issues with the current law as it's written, and how does this legislation propose to address it?
Well, Kate, as we talk to folks like Brett and others in the community and around the state, we heard the same thing, that there are times when projects that literally take 3 weeks to complete can take years to permit, and can be incredibly costly and incredibly time consuming. And I think we all know that we just do not have this time to waste when we are confronting the climate crisis and confronting the threat of sea level rise. So this is a step in streamlining those processes. Obviously, we want to make sure that we are not just permitting, every use along the coast. There's laws and there's regulations for good reasons in some cases, but in many cases, we have people that are having to fill in applications with 7 different agencies, present different types of information to different groups and through different regulatory bodies. So what we want to do is establish a unified, online, easy and straightforward process. And so we're asking, this bill would ask the natural resources secretary and agency to do that. And it's I'll say it's really good to know that the Secretary of the California Natural Resources Agency, Wade Crowfoot, actually cutting green tape is one of his #1 priorities as well. So he's been a great partner, and looking forward to pushing this and other priorities with him.
That's great. Both of you are really focused on sea level rise and how we prepare for it. Brett, you talked about how human interventions have impacted both positively and negatively the coast and our beaches. And I imagine in your work, you're both up against the perceived conflict between economic development and protecting our coastal ecosystems. And I think there was a question in the chat a little bit about this too. My question, I guess, is how hard is that, and how do you approach it? How do you, or how have you been able to overcome that perceived conflict?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So first of all, you need to sort of build a network of people who are involved and connect with stakeholders, understand who the stakeholders are, make sure that those who have an interest have the opportunity to participate and to share their voice and to share their perspective. And secondly, what we're finding is that we can use some of these sort of modeling tools and visualization tools as organizing principles, as ways to help people put themselves around the best available science. Because a lot of times we sort of plan or react in response to our worst fears as opposed to like the most likely outcome. So I think that what we've done, and this has been supported by NOAA's Ecological Effects of Sea Level Rise program, is the formation of what they call Management Transition Advisory Group, which pulls together representatives from government, from environmental groups, from non-governmental organizations into the research process, so that they're involved in defining the research questions, they're involved in shaping the tools and the methods that we develop. And so the research and the problem solving moves forward in a way that's engaged. And it doesn't mean that everybody gets what they want, but I think what it does is it helps us do a better job of acknowledging what those different values and what those different interests are, and it kind of puts things on the table so we can have a more frank and discussion about those trade-offs and so strategies that work for the most people. So I mean, there's at the end of the day, there will be sort of final decisions and political decisions that are made, but I think what we're finding is that there's this really upgrowth of more participatory methods to bring more people involved, into these planning and decision processes, so that say as an environmental group, you're not left at the end of the day facing some report that the analysis has already been done, the alternatives have already been laid out. You never had a chance to get involved in that and to sort of suggest some other ideas. So I think that's the future that we see, is a more engaged problem-solving approach where data and models and visualizations are used to really engage a broad set of constituents.
And how about you, Cottie?
Well, I would just add, I think, Brett, you shared on one of your last charts, sea levels are projected to rise by as much as 7 feet over the course of this century. And this simple reality is that does put millions of people and billions of dollars at risk. And I guess however inconvenient, I think it's Al Gore's phrase, right? However inconvenient that truth might be, at this stage, just sort of burying our head in the sand really isn't an option. And I think what I try to communicate is that we know the more that we delay, the costlier this is going to be. The more that we delay, the fewer options we're going to have. And the more that we delay, the worse that the outcome is going to be. So we really need to begin to act now and to plan now. Absolutely.
Well, here's a question from chat. It's one that I also had for you, Brett. And here it is from the chat. It looks like Newport Beach has made considerable investment over the years in jetties, replenishment of beaches, and so forth. So the question is this part of the problem? And not to pit communities against one another, but I guess the idea of looking at these as communities in isolation, is that part of the problem that we're seeing at Doheny and Capistrano, that there's not been the similar investment? And has the investment in the north part of the county had an impact on the beaches in South County?
Yeah, great. So first off, the investment in South County in terms of making sure that there's a good volume of sediment in the littoral zone, it hasn't been there. It hasn't been there in the same way we've seen in the northern part of the county. So why that is, I can't explain. You'd have to sort of do some more research to think about that. Part of it is that, they had one big marina project, coastal harbor project, that led to a large volume of sediment, compared to northern Orange County when there was Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, there's a naval weapons station, there's Long Beach, there's a lot of projects in North Orange County. But on top of that, there was a sustained nourishment commitment in northern Orange County. And so I can't explain why that was. So the second question, why or could the investment in northern Orange County benefit southern Orange County? And the short answer is no. The way the sediment moves, most of the sediment that comes down the coast from Long Beach through Huntington Beach to Newport Beach, most of it goes offshore towards the Newport Canyon around Newport Beach. So we see it, that's called the San Pedro littoral cell. And then there's a second littoral cell which starts around Dana Point and goes south from there, called the Oceanside cell. So they're really decoupled from a sediment transport perspective. So that's sort of the answer to the second part of the question.
Okay. This is a bit of a question I had, as well as in combination with some things that I saw in the chat. Brett, you told us a bit about green-gray infrastructure and how it can address some of these issues. Are there other examples of that? And then I guess the other question is artificial reefs. Pat Fusco has asked about artificial reefs, littoral current enhancements, things like that. Are those the kinds of things that can minimize beach loss? And are there other examples of that green-gray infrastructure you talked about a bit that can minimize the effect of beach loss?
Sure. So there's going to be a menu of options that any sort of coastal manager might want to think about. So one idea is, can we reduce the wave energy hitting the coast? Okay, so that's the idea behind the artificial reef, or something that's going to help the waves break further offshore, so that by the time the waves hit the coastline, they don't bring as much energy, they're not as erosive. Other options are, can we sort of, design coastal, shoreline stabilization methods so they have more green elements, so that basically they're there to provide more environmental services the 99% of the time when it's not a big erosion threat. But when we really have a severe storm, something super damaging, you have like a hard line of defense against that damage. So we don't lose the road, we don't lose the railway, and so on. So that's the idea of the green gray. Is you have the gray, you kind of bury it, you make sure it's like your hard line last defense. And most of the time, the water that is interacting with sediment, it's interacting with plants. But the thing is that all those green options, in which might be just sand, those all require sediment. I mean, if the sand is gone, we have a serious crisis. I mean, we can think about trying to reduce the wave energy hitting the coast with offshore reefs and things like that. But we also have a pretty steep coastline, so that gets tricky to construct. And then you have questions about the coastal ecosystem, like what does it mean for the plants and the fish and that are accustomed to that environment? Are you creating a type of reef environment which is native to this area? Are you introducing something that's exotic? So every site really requires a lot of care, a lot of thought, a lot of planning. But I think that the one thing that concerns me the most is that you want to have a certain amount of sand in the mix to move around, to dissipate the wave energy, to be a substrate for green systems. And this South County in particular is really short on sediment.
And Cottie, on that green gray infrastructure piece, is that kind of what you're envisioning for adaptation strategies that AB 67 is meant to support?
Yes, absolutely. And I am, as a non-scientist and non-expert, I am so excited about both what we've seen with natural and green infrastructure strategies, and I think what the potential is. So we've seen that these are innovative, cost-effective, and a resilient approach to coastal adaptation. They've proven to be, I think, in many instances, actually both more resilient and more cost-effective than the gray alternatives. And for me, kind of the key takeaway is, when we protect nature, nature is able to protect us. So I'm very excited, I think, both to enable us to expedite the kind of turnaround time for some of these projects, so that like Brett, you said, some of these things are still in an experimental phase. And so we need to learn what works in different communities and on different coastlines. And so that is one of the reasons why I think it's so important for us to enable good projects to get underway as quickly as possible.
I suspect this question is more for Cottie, but we had a question about what do you do with the existing, and maybe for Brett, but what do you do about the existing buildings, the existing hardened surfaces that are interrupting wave actions and having an impact?
And that is definitely one of the toughest challenges, and I think the toughest questions for communities to navigate. And I think, frankly, one of the reasons. Oh my God, what was I going to add?
Go ahead, sorry.
And I think that I was just saying that, that's one of the toughest questions, one of the toughest challenges for communities to navigate. And I think, candidly, one of the reasons why, for decades, local governments haven't really wanted to engage in that conversation. And these are going to have to be local decisions. And we, as the state, are going to have to provide the resources and support for local governments to navigate this. There are some creative solutions that a couple of my colleagues have proposed. I mean, we talk about infrastructure. Clearly, if we're talking about the train tracks that are about to fall into the sea, we're going to need to relocate those, right? Period. When we talk about coastal homes, one of my colleagues, Senator Allen, has introduced a piece of legislation that would create a revolving loan fund for local communities to start to just over time purchase these homes that are at risk, that are under threat, rent them out. So, and then over the useful life of the home, you would actually recoup the costs. and it would not create that horrific economic shock for either one individual or for one community. So I think that there's a ton of work we need to do on this, and this is going to be, I think, a really, really important area of focus for us, both at the state and local level in the coming years.
Yeah. Last question, because I'm cognizant of time, though I think we could go on all night. Brett, you mentioned your work with high school students, and both you, Brett and Cottie, you're familiar with our education programs. And all of our programs are grounded in ongoing research and conservation projects, which includes students collecting data, which is added to shared databases and informs decisions on how to address real conservation questions, including our new coastal dynamics program, where we're having middle and high school students use emery boards to measure sand deposition on our beach over time. So will you tell us a little bit more about what you found, Brett, working with student collected data? How reliable is it? And I guess how helpful is it to you in your research?
Absolutely. So what I found is that the data collected at Crystal Cove through the Crystal Cove Dynamics program has worked really nicely to get us information about the volume of sediment. And what's nice about that data is it's kind of like the satellite data, where if you bring in a class every couple of weeks, you get another survey, you get another estimate of the volume of sediment. But the satellites, it's really hard to get volume. We can get width, but we can't width of the beach, but we can't measure the volume of the sand very well. So one, it's measuring something we can't measure very well with satellites, so it's beneficial there. We've also found that that data works nicely with a graduate course we teach, because at the graduate course, we try to teach students how to sort of simulate and predict how the shoreline will change over time based on the wave climate. And so what we can do is take wave data that's simulated by Scripps Institution of Oceanography and made available publicly, and we can put that into models that tells us, okay, you've got waves from the south, you've got waves from the north, here's the period, here's the wavelength. We can take that information and sort of try to simulate how the beach is eroding. And with the high schools data collected by the high school students, that can serve to validate and calibrate and validate our models. So it's really a great resource. We would love to see a time in the future when there was, say, high school classes all across the county measuring more than one beach, and so we know that that may not be possible, but it does provide a great learning experience for our graduate students, and I think it's also a nice point of feedback for the high school students who are collecting the data to see that the data is part of a broader set of analyses that serves a larger good.
Well, thanks for that. And I guess finally, from either of you, what can people do? Because clearly there are a whole lot of people who care, because here they are logged on to yet another Zoom call. So what would you say that folks on the call can do to support a more sustainable coast?
So I'm not sure if that sounds like a great question for Cottie. Maybe I'll
say both.
But I mean, I'll respond by saying that what I think, one of my goals of the Coastal Dynamics program is just to increase awareness about the dynamics of the coast, how it changes from summer to winter. The beach can disappear in one storm and then come back again. So one is I would ask to be more, try to understand how the sediment's moving, be aware of the processes, but the curve that we take in terms of sea level rise is the big gorilla, 100-pound gorilla out there. So we got to be on these lower trajectories to try to preserve Southern California beaches. And secondly, we have to be ready to work with through our political process to sort of make nourishment projects happen where they make sense. And I'm not saying the nourishment project just needs to happen everywhere, but I think if you look at Northern Orange County, it's an example of how sustained nourishment has maintained a stable shoreline that's benefiting hundreds of thousands of people.
How about you, Cottie?
So I would say two things. Number one is continuing to stay engaged with and support organizations like this that are focused on protecting the coast, that are advocating for sustainable solutions, and ensuring that we are, as a community, confronting the climate crisis. And for folks that are interested in getting more engaged with our office, please follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on social media to see what we're up to. And We'd love people to join our network of community climate advocates, so we can work together to mobilize and advocate on local, regional, and statewide issues.
All right. Well, Cottie and Brett, thank you. Honestly, I have learned so much just even preparing for this talk. I learned a lot. And I know everyone else, if we were in person, they would echo those sentiments. For now, you'll have to take my word for it. So thanks so much to both of you. And I'm putting it out to the universe that next time it's in person.
Absolutely. It's a date. We're doing it.
Yeah, I can't wait. If those of you on the call want more info on Brett's research and Cottie's legislative work, we've put some links to that in the chat for you. And to all of you who logged on tonight, thank you for showing up today and every day for Crystal Cove. You're really part of a remarkable group of people who encircle Crystal Cove and protect it for the thousands of families who have the chance to stay here, for our community to gather in nature, for the plants and the animals that call it home. I think that was Flounder.
And dogs.
And for the children who will learn and be inspired here. So really thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Before we go, I wanted to also extend an invitation for anyone who may be interested in learning more about coastal dynamics, our program, which introduces high school students to coastal engineering. We would love for you, if you want to dive deeper into the program, you can visit our Coastal Dynamics program webpage. We have a link in the chat and learn more. And you can even sign up for our next teacher professional development webinar, which is scheduled for May 6th. So the next event in our series is slated for May 27th, and we'll be talking with Angela Mooney Darcy, who is a member of the Juanito Band of Mission Indians, a Hoshaman Nation. She's been working with tribal nations, indigenous peoples, and grassroots organizations on indigenous environmental justice issues for more than a decade. She is the founder and executive director of the Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples, a Los Angeles-based and indigenous-led organization that works to build capacity of tribal nations and indigenous people to protect sacred lands, waters, and cultures. And honestly, I really cannot wait to speak with her. I hope we see you all again then. And until then, good night, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Cottie.
Thank you, Kate. Good to see you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.